A massive Apache patrol surrounded his house for the favor he did to their daughters. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. In the dusty, isolated corners of the American West, where the land was vast and the people few, there lived a rancher named Thomas. Thomas was a quiet, humble man who preferred the solitude of his ranch to the bustling town life. His property was surrounded by miles of open prairie, the type of isolation that gave him peace but also left him vulnerable. He had always known that in the Wild West, you had to take care of yourself. No one else would. But despite the ruggedness of the frontier, Thomas had one thing that set him apart from the rest: a heart full of kindness. It was one crisp autumn day when that kindness would lead him down a path he could never have imagined. While tending to his cattle by the creek, Thomas noticed a young Apache girl limping toward him. She looked tired and frail, her eyes filled with fear. Thomas, being the man he was, immediately approached her, offering her a drink of water from his canteen. She hesitated at first, but accepted. After all, in this harsh land, a simple act of kindness could mean the difference between life and death. Thomas had no idea who she was or the significance of helping her, but to him, it didn't matter. It was just the right thing to do. The girl thanked him with a soft, strained voice before walking off into the trees, vanishing from his sight as quickly as she had appeared. Little did Thomas know, this simple act would set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. The next morning, as the sun began to rise and the cool morning air clung to the land, Thomas stepped out of his cabin to begin his day. As he opened the door, the sight that greeted him sent a chill down his spine. A massive Apache patrol, nearly 50 strong, stood silently outside his house. Their faces were painted in traditional war paint, their expressions unreadable. They did not move or speak, simply standing in perfect formation as if they had all the time in the world. Thomas's heart raced. He had never seen so many warriors gathered in one place, and certainly never so close to his ranch. The sight was intimidating, and for a moment, he considered retreating inside, but something told him this wasn't a normal confrontation. As the warriors stood there in silence, waiting for something, Thomas wondered what was about to happen. Had he done something wrong? Had helping the young girl somehow angered the Apache tribe? His thoughts raced as he stepped cautiously forward, unsure of how to handle the situation. His mind flickered back to the girl he had helped just the day before. Had she been a part of this group? Was this some sort of retribution? Or was there something else at play? He knew the Apache were a proud and warrior-like people, known for their fierce independence and protective nature. But could his simple kindness have ignited something larger than he could comprehend? His breath caught in his throat as he slowly approached the warriors, his steps hesitant. The morning air was still, the silence around him deafening. He waited, watching as they remained motionless, their eyes following his every movement. What would happen next? Thomas stood motionless, his heart pounding in his chest as he faced the silent Apache patrol. The warriors, all clad in their traditional attire and adorned with war paint, made no move to approach him. They simply watched him, their eyes filled with an unreadable intensity. The tension in the air was thick, and Thomas could feel the weight of their gaze on him. He had helped one of their own, a young Apache girl, and now, here they were. Was this a show of gratitude, or something far more dangerous? He wasn't sure, but he knew that whatever was about to happen would change everything. The leader of the group, an older warrior with a weathered face and a commanding presence, stepped forward. His movements were deliberate, each step carrying a sense of authority. Thomas's throat tightened as he watched the man approach. The leader stopped just a few feet away from him, his piercing eyes locking onto Thomas's. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence between them was thick and heavy, as if both were trying to read each other. Finally, the leader spoke in a deep, steady voice. "You helped our daughter." His words were clear, though they carried a weight that made Thomas's heart skip a beat. Thomas swallowed, his mind racing. "I didn't mean any harm," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "She was hurt. I just helped her." The leader nodded slowly, as if considering Thomas's words carefully. "We know," he said, "but you do not understand what that means." The words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. He had no idea what this could mean for him. His mind raced back to the young girl he had helped. She had been injured, yes, but she had also been scared, and in her eyes, he had seen something more, something desperate. Now, standing before this group of warriors, Thomas realized that his actions, no matter how innocent, might have far-reaching consequences. The leader continued, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "In our tribe, we do not show kindness to strangers without reason. When you helped her, you did not just help a girl. You helped the future leader of our people." Thomas blinked in confusion. "A leader? She's just a child." The leader's eyes darkened, and a few of the warriors behind him shifted uneasily. "She is more than that," he said sharply. "Her bloodline is one of great importance to us. She carries the legacy of our people, and you, by helping her, have become a part of that legacy." Thomas's head spun. He had no idea what this man was talking about. All he had done was offer water and shelter to a young girl who had seemed lost and in pain. He had no idea she came from such a powerful family. The leader took a step closer to Thomas, his gaze never leaving his face. "We have come to repay you for your kindness," he said, his tone softening just slightly. "But you must understand that your life is now intertwined with ours." Thomas felt his knees weaken. What had he gotten himself into? "We will not harm you," the leader said, his voice firm. "But you must come with us. We have much to discuss." Thomas hesitated. He had always been a man of the land, a man who cherished his solitude. The idea of leaving his home, of stepping into the world of the Apache, terrified him. But there was no turning back now. He had already done something that would forever alter the course of his life. "I will come with you," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. The leader nodded, and with that, the warriors slowly began to move, forming a circle around Thomas. They weren't threatening, but there was no mistaking their power. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. This was no simple repayment for a kind act. He had unknowingly become part of something much larger than he could have imagined. Thomas followed the Apache warriors, his heart still racing as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The leader of the group had reassured him that he wasn't in any immediate danger, but the gravity of the situation was sinking in. He had helped a girl, a child really, in need. But now he was being taken into the heart of Apache territory, surrounded by warriors, all for a kindness he had done without thinking. The group moved silently through the rugged landscape, the distant hills stretching endlessly in every direction. The air was thick with tension, and Thomas couldn't help but feel like he was being pulled into something far larger than his simple ranching life. The further they walked, the more the reality of his situation set in. He had no idea where they were going or what would happen once they arrived. As they moved, the warriors kept their distance, but Thomas could feel their eyes on him at all times, their gazes sharp and calculating. The leader, who had introduced himself as Kiona, walked beside Thomas, never speaking but always keeping a watchful eye on him. After what felt like hours of walking, the group finally reached a secluded valley. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the landscape. The valley was quiet, almost peaceful, but the feeling of being an outsider weighed heavily on Thomas. He had heard stories about the Apache, about their fierce independence and their strong connection to the land, but he had never imagined he would find himself in the middle of their world. Kiona led him to a large, circular structure made of wood and stone, with a fire pit in the center. This was clearly a place of importance, and Thomas could feel the weight of history in the air. The warriors gathered around the fire, and Kiona motioned for Thomas to sit. As the fire crackled to life, Kiona finally spoke. "You have helped us, and for that, you will be honored. But you must also understand what you have done," he said, his voice low and steady. Thomas looked at him, trying to process the meaning behind the words. "What do you mean?" he asked. Kiona looked at him for a long moment before speaking again. "By helping our daughter, you have unknowingly accepted a bond with our people. The blood that flows in her veins is sacred to us. She is the daughter of a great chief, and her future holds the key to the survival of our tribe. Your kindness has made you a part of that future." Thomas felt a wave of confusion wash over him. He had simply done what anyone would do. He had helped a young girl who had been hurt. Now, somehow, He was involved in the fate of an entire tribe? I don't understand, Thomas said, his voice trembling slightly. I just helped her. I didn't know who she was or what she meant to you. Kiona nodded slowly. That is the power of kindness, he said. You did not act with an agenda, yet your actions have set in motion something that cannot be undone. You are now bound to us, whether you wish it or not. Thomas could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had never asked for any of this. All he had wanted was to live a simple life, to care for his ranch, and to avoid the complications that came with living on the frontier. But now, it seemed, his life was intertwined with the Apache tribe in ways he could never have predicted. As the fire burned down to embers, the warriors around them began to speak in their native tongue, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that felt ancient. Kiona translated for Thomas, explaining that the tribe had been watching over the land for generations, protecting it from outsiders and preserving its history. You are now part of that history, Kiona said, his tone resolute. And you must decide what role you will play in it. Thomas looked around at the faces of the warriors, their expressions unreadable but their presence undeniable. He had been thrust into something he didn't fully understand, and now he had to make a choice. He could walk away, return to his ranch, and forget everything, but he knew that was not an option. He had already been marked by his act of kindness. There was no turning back now. What do you want from me? Thomas asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that gripped him. Kiona's gaze softened for the first time. We need your help, he said. The future of our people depends on it. Your knowledge of the land, your skills as a rancher, can help us survive the challenges ahead. Thomas nodded slowly. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had changed forever, and he would have to find a way to navigate this new world, for better or for worse. The next morning, Thomas awoke to the sound of voices and the crackling of the fire. The warriors had prepared a meal, and the atmosphere was much less tense than the night before. Despite his lingering confusion and the uncertainty of his situation, Thomas could not deny the feeling of calm that had settled over the camp. The Apache had offered him food and water, and he had accepted it without question. He had no choice but to trust them for now. Kiona, the leader of the group, approached him as he sat by the fire, his expression thoughtful but not unfriendly. We have discussed the next steps, Kiona said. Our people are facing challenges that even our strength may not overcome. We need your knowledge of the land. You know the terrain better than any of us, and that can help us avoid the dangers ahead. Thomas looked at him, still processing everything. He had spent his life working the land, tending to cattle and crops, but he had never been asked to fight a war. He was a rancher, not a soldier. I'm not a warrior, Thomas said, his voice steady but unsure. I can help you with the land, with surviving out here, but I don't know anything about fighting. Kiona nodded slowly. We do not ask you to fight, he said. But we need to move quickly. There are men from the settlement who threaten our way of life. They do not understand our customs, our connection to the land. They want to take it from us. If we do not act, we may lose everything. Thomas could see the weight of Kiona's words. The Apache had always fought to protect their land, their way of life. But the settlers had been encroaching on their territory for years, pushing them further and further into the wild. It was a battle that had been fought for generations. Kiona continued, Your knowledge of the land will allow us to stay ahead of them. We need you to guide us through the mountain passes, to find the safest routes and the best places to hide. Thomas sat in silence for a moment, his mind racing. He had lived alone for years, far from the nearest town, far from the conflicts that had shaped the lives of so many others. He had never been involved in anything like this. But now, it seemed, he had no choice. The Apache had done him no harm. They had shown him kindness, and he had returned it without knowing the consequences. And now, they were asking for his help. Slowly, Thomas nodded. I'll help you, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Kiona's eyes softened, a look of approval crossing his face. You are a man of honor, Kiona said. We will not forget this. Over the next few days, Thomas guided the Apache warriors through the rugged terrain of the mountains, using his knowledge of the land to help them navigate the steep hills and dense forests. They moved quickly, always staying a step ahead of the settlers who were hunting them. The warriors were skilled, their movements fluid and precise, but Thomas's guidance allowed them to avoid many of the dangers that might have slowed them down. As they traveled, Thomas began to see the Apache in a new light. They were not the savages the settlers had claimed them to be. They were a proud people, fiercely protective of their land and their families. They valued loyalty and honor, traits that Thomas had always respected. But as much as he admired them, he knew that the dangers they faced were real. The settlers were growing bolder, and Thomas had seen firsthand the lengths they were willing to go to take what they wanted. One night, as they set up camp under the cover of darkness, Thomas sat with Kiona by the fire. The sky above them was clear, the stars shining brightly in the vast expanse of the desert. "What will happen if we can't outrun them?" Thomas asked, his voice low. Kiona didn't answer immediately. He stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. "We will fight," he said at last. "But it will not be the end. We will protect our people, our land, no matter the cost. We have fought for generations, and we will continue to fight for as long as it takes." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine at Kiona's words. He had never been a part of a battle, never had to face the reality of war. But now, it seemed, that was exactly what he was facing. The Apache were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their very existence. And Thomas had become a part of that fight, whether he liked it or not. The days that followed were filled with a tension that grew thicker with every passing hour. Thomas continued to guide the Apache warriors through the mountains, using his knowledge of the land to help them navigate through the rocky terrain and dense forests. But despite the outward calm, Thomas could feel the storm of conflict brewing on the horizon. The settlers were not far behind, and each day brought the looming threat of an inevitable confrontation. The warriors moved with purpose, their eyes sharp and alert. They were not just surviving, they were preparing for something. Thomas knew they were ready to fight if it came to that, but he could see the weight of the situation on their faces. They were not eager for bloodshed. They had seen enough of it in their lives. As they traveled deeper into the wilderness, Thomas began to understand the full extent of what was at stake. Kiona, who had once been a stranger to him, now seemed like a brother in arms. The leader of the Apache tribe had shown him a side of their culture that Thomas had never imagined. The Apache were not just a people, they were a family, bound by tradition, loyalty, and a fierce love for their land. They fought not just to survive, but to protect their way of life, their families, and their future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the group gathered around the campfire once again. The stars above them shone brightly, casting a soft glow over the landscape. The crackling fire provided warmth and light as the warriors sat in silence, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Kiona sat beside Thomas, his eyes reflecting the firelight as he spoke in a low voice. "We are not just fighting for our land," he said, his words filled with conviction. "We are fighting for our future, for the generations that will come after us. If we lose this fight, we lose everything." Thomas nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of those words. He had never truly understood the importance of land until now. It wasn't just about cattle or crops, it was about identity. The Apache people's connection to the land was deep, rooted in generations of history, tradition, and struggle. "I understand," Thomas said quietly. "But how can we win against so many? The settlers have numbers, resources. They won't stop until they've taken everything from you." Kiona looked at him, his gaze unwavering. "We may be fewer in number," he said, "but we have something they do not. We have the land, the knowledge, and the will to fight for it. And we have each other." Thomas felt a surge of respect for the Apache warriors. They were not just defending their homes, they were defending their culture, their ancestors, and their children's future. It was a fight that transcended the present moment. It was a fight for everything they had ever known. As the night wore on, Thomas found himself thinking more and more about the choices before him. He had become a part of this struggle, whether he had intended to or not. The Apache had accepted him as one of their own, and in return, he had given them his trust and loyalty. He had a deep sense of responsibility now, not just to the Apache people, but to the land that had become his own, too. The next morning, the group set out again, moving swiftly through the wilderness. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was also a sense of purpose. Thomas was no longer just a rancher. He was a part of something greater, a cause that was bigger than any of them. The settlers were closing in, and time was running out. They had to make it to the pass before the settlers did. The journey was grueling, but Thomas pushed forward, using every ounce of his strength and knowledge to guide the Apache warriors. As they reached the pass, they stopped to rest for a moment. It was here that Thomas realized the true scope of the Apache struggle. The pass was not just a physical barrier. It was a symbol of everything they were fighting to protect. It was their last line of defense. As the warriors prepared for the final leg of their journey, Kiona turned to Thomas, a silent understanding passing between them. "This is it," Kiona said. "We fight here, or we lose everything." Thomas nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment of truth. The Apache were ready, and so was he. He had come a long way from the quiet rancher who had never imagined himself part of a battle. But now, standing beside the Apache warriors, he knew that the fight for the land was his fight too. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and the promise of an impending storm. Thomas stood with Kiona, the Apache leader, at the edge of the narrow mountain pass. Below them, the vast wilderness stretched out, and in the distance, he could make out the dust clouds of the approaching settlers. They were coming fast, their numbers growing with every passing moment. It would only be a matter of hours before they reached the pass. Thomas's heart raced as he surveyed the land. The pass was narrow and difficult to traverse, but it was also their best chance at escaping without being trapped. The Apache had to hold the line here, at this crucial choke point. Kiona turned to him, his expression resolute. "This is where we make our stand," he said. "The settlers think they can take everything from us, but they don't understand this land. This is our home, and we will defend it with everything we have." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of those words. He had come a long way from the rancher who had simply helped a young girl. Now, he was part of a fight for survival, for the future of a people he had come to respect and admire. He was no longer just an outsider, he was one of them. As the Apache warriors prepared for the fight, Thomas joined them, his hands steady despite the pounding of his heart. He was not a fighter, but he had something the Apache needed, a deep understanding of the land and how to use it to their advantage. Together, they began to fortify the pass, setting up makeshift barriers and creating traps that would slow the settlers' advance. They worked quickly, knowing that time was running out. The warriors moved with precision, their movements efficient and practiced. But as the sun began to set, a sense of dread settled over the camp. The settlers were getting closer, and the reality of the situation began to sink in. Thomas found himself standing beside Kiona once again, looking out over the narrow pass. "Do you think we can hold them off?" Thomas asked quietly. Kiona's eyes were hard, focused on the distance. "We will hold them off, or we will die trying," he said, his voice steady. "But we will not let them take this land. Not without a fight." The words carried the weight of generations of struggle, of a people who had fought to protect their land and their way of life. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. This was not just about defending a piece of land. It was about defending everything they had ever known. As night fell, the Apache warriors took their positions along the pass, each one prepared for what was to come. Thomas stood with them, his heart heavy with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The stars above them flickered in the dark sky, offering little comfort. He had never imagined his life would take him to this point. He had come to the mountains seeking solitude, and now, here he was, standing with warriors ready to defend their home from an enemy they knew all too well. As the first sounds of the settlers' approach reached his ears, Thomas's grip tightened on his rifle. The time for waiting was over. The fight was about to begin. The settlers, unaware of the trap that had been set for them, marched toward the pass. They had come to take the land by force, to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. But what they didn't know was that the Apache had been waiting for this moment for generations. The battle began with the crack of gunfire, the sound echoing through the pass as the Apache warriors engaged the settlers in a fierce, brutal fight. Thomas fought alongside them, using every ounce of his strength and knowledge of the land to help them defend the pass. It wasn't long before the settlers realized they were up against more than just a few scattered Apache. They were facing a well-organized and determined force. The Apache knew the land better than anyone, and that gave them the upper hand. As the hours wore on, Thomas found himself moving through the chaos, helping where he could, guiding the warriors through the most treacherous parts of the terrain. The battle raged on, and the Apache fought with everything they had. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of their people. Thomas had never known a fight like this, and as he looked around at the warriors beside him, he realized that this was more than just a battle. It was the culmination of everything they had ever fought for. They would not back down. As dawn broke and the first light of day touched the mountains, the battle began to shift. The settlers, battered and outnumbered, began to retreat, realizing they could not win. The Apache had held their ground. The land was safe, for now. Thomas stood at the edge of the pass, his body bruised and exhausted, but his heart filled with a deep sense of pride. They had won, but at what cost? The Apache had defended their land, but they knew this was only the beginning. The settlers would return, and when they did, the fight would continue. The days following the battle were filled with a sense of both victory and uncertainty. The Apache had successfully defended the pass, and the settlers had retreated for the time being, but Thomas knew this was not the end. The land was still at risk, and the settlers would not give up so easily. They would return, and when they did, the Apache would have to be ready. The warriors had celebrated their hard-fought victory, but the mood was somber. They had lost many in the battle, and each life lost was a painful reminder of the stakes of this war. Thomas stood with Kiona by the fire that night, the flames casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. "We've won this battle," Kiona said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "But the war is far from over. The settlers will regroup, and they will come back stronger." Thomas nodded, his thoughts swirling. He had seen the fear in the faces of the warriors after the battle, despite their victory. The settlers had powerful allies, and they would not be easily defeated. "What can we do to stop them?" Thomas asked. "We've already fought once, but they'll be back. How do we stop them for good?" Kiona looked at him, his eyes filled with wisdom and sorrow. "The settlers do not understand our ways, our connection to the land. They see it as something to be conquered, something to be owned. But we do not fight for land alone. We fight for our people, for our future, for the generations that will come after us. That is what makes us strong." Thomas looked around at the warriors gathered around the fire, their faces grim and determined. They were a family, bound by more than just blood. They were bound by a shared history, a shared struggle, and a shared love for the land. They were not going to give up. "What can I do to help?" Thomas asked. Kiona paused for a moment before answering. "You know the land better than any of us. Your knowledge will be vital in the battles to come. We will need to use every advantage we have. We can't afford to be caught off guard again." Thomas had always known the land, but now, it felt like it was more than just the place he worked. It was the battleground, the lifeblood of everything he held dear. It was the heart of the Apache, and it was worth fighting for. Over the next few weeks, Thomas worked alongside the Apache warriors, helping to fortify their defenses and strategize their next moves. They spent long hours in the mountains, scouting the land, looking for weaknesses in the settlers' plans. Thomas knew the terrain better than anyone, and his knowledge of the passes, the water sources, and the hidden routes gave the Apache an edge. But as much as they prepared, there was always the looming fear that the settlers would come again, and next time, they would be better prepared. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Kiona spoke again. "The time is coming," he said, his voice grave. "The settlers are regrouping, and they will not stop until they have taken everything from us. We must be ready." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine at the weight of Kiona's words. The Apache were ready for battle, but they were also prepared to fight for their way of life, for their land, and for their future. They had fought before, and they would fight again. And this time, they would make sure that the settlers understood that this land was theirs. The Apache warriors were not just defending their homes. They were defending everything they held dear. They had the strength, the knowledge, and the determination to stand against any enemy. As the days passed and the final preparations were made, Thomas stood with Kiona once more, looking out over the land. The Apache were ready. They had done everything they could to protect their future. Now, it was time to fight again. The settlers would not take this land without a fight, and the Apache would not back down. They would stand together, as they always had, and they would defend their home, no matter the cost. The morning was eerily quiet as Thomas stood at the edge of the makeshift fortifications, looking out over the rugged land that had become both his sanctuary and his battleground. The Apache warriors had been preparing for this moment for weeks, reinforcing their position and ensuring that every trap, every advantage, was set. But the tension was palpable. The settlers were coming, and they were bringing more men, more firepower, and a relentless desire to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the sound of horses' hooves and distant voices began to reach Thomas's ears. The settlers were closing in. There was no turning back now. The Apache had taken their position high in the hills, where the land offered them a clear view of the pass. It was the best place to defend, but it also left them exposed if the settlers managed to find their way around the traps. Thomas felt the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. He was no longer just a rancher trying to live in peace. He was now part of a battle for survival, for the preservation of a way of life that had existed long before the settlers had arrived. He had come to understand the Apache in a way he never thought possible. Their connection to the land, their fierce loyalty to one another, and their unwavering resolve to protect what was theirs were things that now ran through his own veins. Kiona approached him, his face grim, but there was a fire in his eyes that spoke of the warrior spirit that had been passed down through generations. "It is time," Kiona said simply, his voice low but full of command. Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of the words. It was time to fight. The Apache had fought countless battles before, and they would fight this one with all their strength. But Thomas knew this would be different. This time, it was not just a battle for land. It was a battle for their very survival. The settlers were relentless, and if they were allowed to win, they would not stop until they had claimed everything the Apache held dear. The first shots were fired just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The Apache, while hidden behind rocks and trees, fired their rifles with precision, picking off the settlers one by one. The sound of gunfire echoed through the pass, followed by the screams of men as they fell. The settlers had been caught off guard, but they quickly regrouped, charging forward with renewed fury. Thomas fought alongside the Apache, his rifle steady in his hands as he helped to hold the line. The battle raged on through the night, the air thick with smoke and the scent of gunpowder. The Apache warriors fought with all the strength they had, but as the hours wore on, it became clear that the settlers were not going to back down. They were determined, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to take the land. As dawn broke, the sound of hooves once again filled the air. The Apache had been pushed back, and the settlers were beginning to surround them. Kiona called out to his warriors, his voice full of authority. "Fall back. We fight another day." The order was given, and the Apache warriors began to retreat, moving quickly and silently through the rugged terrain. Thomas followed them, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the battle had been lost, but the war was far from over. They had given everything they had, but the settlers were relentless, and the fight for the land would continue. As they made their way to a safer position, Kiona turned to Thomas, his face solemn but resolute. "This is not the end," he said. "We will not give up. We will fight until we have no strength left, and then we will fight some more. This land is ours, and we will protect it." Thomas felt a deep sense of pride in the Apache warriors. They were not just fighting for the land. They were fighting for the future, for the children who would one day walk the earth they had fought to protect. He had seen their strength, their determination, and their love for the land. And he knew, deep down, that they would never stop fighting. As they moved deeper into the mountains, Thomas looked back one last time at the pass they had defended so fiercely. The settlers may have won this battle, but the Apache were not finished yet. The fight was far from over, and they would rise again. Thomas was ready to stand by their side, no matter the cost. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. The Apache warriors had retreated further into the mountains, leaving behind the battlefield where they had fought so fiercely. Thomas walked alongside them, his heart heavy with the knowledge that, though they had survived this fight, the war was far from over. The settlers would come again, and when they did, the Apache would have to be ready. But Thomas had also seen something in the warriors that he hadn't fully understood before: resilience. They had fought not just for land, but for a future that was more than just survival. It was about their identity, their culture, and their children. And as he moved through the quiet camp that night, he realized that this was something he could never turn his back on. The next morning, Kiona gathered the warriors together. They were tired, their faces worn from the battle, but there was a fire in their eyes, a determination that refused to be extinguished. "We have lost a battle," Kiona said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "But we will not lose the war. We will keep fighting, and we will make sure the land stays ours. Thomas stood beside him, now more a part of this fight than ever. He had helped defend this land once, and he would help again. Kiona looked at him, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. You are one of us now, Thomas, Kiona said, and we will need your knowledge. Together, we will make sure they never take what is ours. As the days passed, Thomas worked alongside the warriors, helping them fortify their camp, set traps, and scout the land for any sign of the settlers. He had become a part of the Apache, not just in name, but in spirit. He knew the land like the back of his hand, and now, more than ever, he understood the stakes. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Kiona shared a story. It was a tale passed down through generations of Apache warriors, a story about a time when their people had faced overwhelming odds, but had still managed to prevail. The story spoke of unity, strength, and the belief that no matter how difficult the battle, the Apache would always rise again. This is our story, Kiona said, looking around at the gathered warriors. And we will write the next chapter, just as those before us did. Thomas listened, moved by the deep connection the Apache had to their history. He realized that they were not fighting just for themselves, but for the generations yet to come. This land, this fight, it wasn't just about survival. It was about preserving a legacy. The battle that loomed on the horizon was still a long way off, but Thomas felt ready. He had come to understand what it meant to fight for something larger than himself. The Apache had shown him the importance of loyalty, of standing up for what was right, and of never giving up, no matter the odds. And now, standing alongside them, he knew that he would do whatever it took to protect the future of the Apache people. As they moved further into the mountains, preparing for the inevitable return of the settlers, Thomas could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. But it was a responsibility he was willing to bear. For the Apache, for the land, and for the future. The war was far from over, but Thomas knew that as long as the Apache stood together, they would never be defeated. The settlers may have pushed them back once, but the Apache would rise again, stronger and more united than ever before. And Thomas would be right there with them, ready to fight for the future they all shared. Immerse yourself in a gripping tale of survival, honor, and fierce loyalty with this captivating story that unfolds in the heart of the Wild West. Follow Thomas, a rancher who finds himself swept into the world of the Apache people after a simple act of kindness. In this tale, set against the rugged backdrop of the American frontier, the Apache warriors battle not only for their land, but for their very existence. This is not just another one of the many Western stories. It is a testament to the strength and resilience of a people who refuse to be forgotten. As the settlers push forward with their relentless quest to claim the land, Thomas, guided by the Apache's wisdom and unwavering determination, takes on the responsibility of defending what is rightfully theirs. The stakes are high, and with every turn, the tension builds, pulling Thomas deeper into the fight for survival. Western stories often capture the spirit of the frontier, but this one dives into the heart of what it means to protect one's culture, family, and future. As the battle intensifies, Thomas learns that his life will never be the same, and the lessons he learns from the Apache will stay with him forever. These are the kinds of Western stories that show the raw reality of the American West, where every decision can change the course of history. Prepare yourself for an epic adventure that captures the essence of what it means to fight for what you believe in, no matter the cost. This story, like so many other great Western stories, reminds us of the sacrifices made and the battles fought for freedom, justice, and honor. If you're a fan of intense, emotionally charged Western stories, this one will not disappoint.